Clara Anderson arrived in Montana as a hopeful mail-order bride, only to face cruel rejection when Thomas Grady discovered she was a widow. Humiliated and alone, she fled into the wilderness where death seemed certain, until a reclusive outlaw named Calder Reed found her. Now she must choose between safety and true love as dangers threaten their growing bond. Before we start the video, comment where you are tuning in from. Clara Anderson clutched her carpetbag tighter as the stagecoach rumbled into the small Montana town of Pine Ridge. Her heart fluttered with anticipation and fear. After 3 months of exchanging letters with Thomas Grady, today she would finally meet her future husband. The late autumn air bit at her cheeks as she stepped down from the coach, scanning the gathered crowd for the man whose photograph she kept tucked in her coat pocket. "Miss Anderson," a deep voice called. A tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and Sunday best approached her. His smile seemed genuine, and Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thomas Grady looked exactly like his photograph. "Mr. Grady," she replied, extending her gloved hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Thomas took her hand, his eyes sweeping over her appraisingly. "The pleasure is mine. Welcome to Pine Ridge." Several townsfolk had gathered to witness the arrival of Thomas Grady's mail-order bride. Clara felt their curious gazes as Thomas escorted her toward the church where Reverend Collins waited to perform their ceremony. They had agreed in their correspondence to marry immediately upon her arrival. "You're even lovelier than your letters suggested," Thomas said, leading her through the town square. Clara smiled modestly. "Thank you for your kind words. I'm grateful for this new beginning." As they approached the church steps, a woman stepped forward from the crowd. "Thomas Grady, aren't you going to ask the lady about her past before you tie yourself to her?" Thomas halted, turning to face the woman. "Mrs. Porter, this is hardly appropriate." The woman ignored him, her sharp eyes fixing on Clara. "We've heard rumors, Miss Anderson. Or should I say Mrs. Anderson?" Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She had mentioned her widowhood in her third letter to Thomas, explaining how her husband had died from fever 2 years prior. His response had been sympathetic, stating that her past didn't concern him. Thomas turned to Clara, uncertainty clouding his features. "What is she talking about?" "I mentioned in my letters that I was widowed," Clara said quietly, aware of the crowd growing around them. "My husband Jacob passed 2 years ago." Thomas dropped her hand as if burned. "You're a widow. I received no such letter." Clara's stomach twisted with dread. "But I wrote to you about it. You responded that it didn't matter to you." "I would never agree to marry a widow," Thomas said, stepping away from her. His face had transformed, disgust replacing the warmth that had been there moments before. "A proper woman only marries once. What kind of mother would you be to my children with that kind of history?" Whispers rippled through the crowd. Clara felt as if the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. "Thomas, please, you said in your letter—" "I said no such thing," he interrupted harshly. "Our arrangement is void. I will not marry used goods." The words struck Clara like physical blows. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these strangers who watched her humiliation with such evident interest. "Then I shall seek lodging at your local hotel until I can arrange passage back east," she said with what dignity she could muster. Mrs. Porter laughed coldly. "The Pine Ridge Hotel doesn't accommodate women of questionable virtue traveling alone." "I am a widow, not a woman of questionable virtue," Clara replied, her voice shaking. "Same difference in these parts," someone in the crowd muttered, followed by snickers. Thomas backed away, rejoining the townsfolk. "You should never have come here under false pretenses, Miss Anderson. Pine Ridge is a God-fearing town with standards." "I never misrepresented myself," Clara insisted, but her words fell on deaf ears. The crowd had already made their judgment. Reverend Collins stepped forward, his expression stern. "Perhaps it would be best if you moved on, Miss Anderson. There's a stagecoach leaving for Helena tomorrow morning." "And where am I to stay tonight?" Clara asked, desperation creeping into her voice. No one answered. Thomas had already turned his back and was walking away. The crowd began to disperse, leaving Clara alone in the town square with her carpet bag. As dusk settled over Pine Ridge, Clara found herself huddled in the small stagecoach station. The station master had reluctantly allowed her to wait there until morning, though his disapproving glances made it clear she wasn't welcome. Through the window, she watched as townsfolk passed by, some pointing and whispering. Word had spread quickly. A group of young men loitered outside, occasionally shouting lewd suggestions at her through the door. The station master did nothing to discourage them. When one threw a rock that shattered the window beside her, Clara knew she couldn't stay until morning. Gathering her meager belongings, she slipped out the back door of the station and hurried toward the edge of town. Pine Ridge was surrounded by dense forest. Perhaps she could find shelter among the trees until morning, away from the cruelty of the townspeople. The temperature dropped rapidly as night fell. Clara had not anticipated needing to survive a Montana night outdoors, and her city coat provided little protection against the biting wind. Snow began to fall as she stumbled deeper into the forest, disoriented and increasingly desperate. "Just until morning," she whispered to herself, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Just need to last until morning." The snow fell heavier, covering the ground and obscuring any path back to town. Clara's feet grew numb, then painful, then numb again. Her fingers could barely grip her carpet bag. Each step became more difficult than the last as the cold seeped into her bones. When she stumbled over a fallen log and fell face first into a snowdrift, Clara found she lacked the strength to rise. The cold had sapped her will along with her warmth. As consciousness began to slip away, Clara thought of her parents, both long dead, and of Jacob, who had loved her well during their brief marriage. She would join them soon. Through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, Clara thought she heard the crunch of boots on snow and felt the presence of someone standing over her. But it was too late for rescue, too late for second chances. As darkness claimed her, Clara Anderson surrendered to the cold embrace of the Montana wilderness, certain that death had come for her at last. Warmth returned first, seeping into Clara's frozen limbs like a tide. Then pain, sharp and insistent, as circulation restored feeling to her extremities. She opened her eyes to a rough-hewn ceiling of timber logs. A crackling fire cast flickering shadows across unfamiliar walls. "So you decided to live after all," a gruff voice observed. Clara turned her head to find a man seated in a wooden chair near the fireplace. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a dark beard and eyes that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Not Thomas Grady, certainly. This man had the weathered look of someone who lived far from town and society. "Where am I?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My cabin," the man replied simply. He rose and approached, offering a tin cup of steaming liquid. "Drink this. It'll help with the cold." Clara struggled to sit up, realizing she was wrapped in several thick furs on a narrow bed against the wall. Her dress and coat were gone, replaced by an oversized flannel shirt that clearly belonged to her rescuer. Modesty demanded she object, but survival instinct won out. She accepted the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Reed," Calder Reed. He returned to his chair, watching her with a careful gaze. "Found you half frozen in the snow about a mile from my property. What were you doing out there?" Clara sipped the hot liquid, a bitter tea with honey, before answering. "I was trying to find shelter for the night." Calder raised an eyebrow, waiting for more explanation. When none came, he nodded toward the window, where snow continued to fall heavily. Blizzards set in. You'd have been dead by morning. "Perhaps that would have been simpler," Clara murmured, then regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. Calder studied her with renewed interest. "Nothing simple about dying, ma'am. Especially not that way." He prodded the fire with an iron poker. "Town's a 5-mile walk. What brought you out this way?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. This stranger had saved her life, but she knew nothing about him. Still, what did she have to lose? "I was to be married today," she said, "to Thomas Grady. But he rejected me when he learned I was a widow. Understanding flickered across Calder's face. Ah, Grady, that explains it. You know him? Know of him. Don't go to town much myself. Calder stood and moved to a pot simmering on the small stove. Pine Ridge has its own ideas about propriety. Ideas I don't share. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. Eat. We can talk more when you've got your strength back. The next morning, Clara woke to find her dress cleaned and dried, hanging near the fire. Calder was nowhere to be seen. She dressed quickly, grateful for the privacy, and took stock of her surroundings. The cabin was small but efficient, consisting of one main room with the bed she'd occupied, a table with 2 chairs, the fireplace, and a small cooking area. A chest in the corner presumably held Calder's belongings. Everything was neat, if sparse. Through the window, she could see the snow had stopped, leaving a pristine white blanket over everything. The door opened, and Calder entered carrying an armload of firewood. He nodded at her. Good. You're up. Mr. Reed, I cannot thank you enough for your kindness, Clara began. As soon as the path is clear, I'll make my way back to town and trouble you no further. Calder deposited the wood beside the fireplace. And what will you do in town? The stage won't run for at least a week after this snow. The reality of her situation crashed down on Clara. She had no money for lodging, even if someone would rent to her. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I don't know, she admitted, but I can't impose on you. It's not an imposition if I offer, Calder said. Stay until the stage runs again. In exchange, you can help with the cabin. I'm not much for housekeeping. Clara considered his offer. What choice did she have? That's very generous. It's practical. Nothing more. His tone left no room for further discussion. Over the next few days, Clara settled into a routine. She kept the cabin tidy, mended Calder's clothes, and prepared meals from his stores of preserved meat and vegetables. He spent most days outside, checking traps or hunting, returning with game and firewood. They spoke little at first, each cautious around the other. On the 4th evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Calder finally asked the question that had been hovering between them. How long were you married? Clara looked up from the sock she was darning. Nearly 3 years. Jacob was a clerk in my father's store. He took ill suddenly. Fever took him within a week. Calder nodded. I'm sorry. It was 2 years ago now. Clara set her mending aside. May I ask why you live so far from town? A shadow crossed Calder's face. Town and I don't agree on certain matters. Such as? Such as who deserves second chances. Calder stared into the fire. I wasn't always a trapper. Used to ride with men who took what they wanted. Never killed anyone. But I helped those who did. Clara absorbed this information, surprised by her lack of fear. You were an outlaw. Was, he emphasized. Served 5 years in prison. Came here to start fresh where no one knew me. But word gets around. So Pine Ridge rejected you too, Clara said softly. Calder's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. They tolerate me because I trade fair for what I need, but they don't forget, and they don't forgive. Something shifted between them that night, a recognition of shared experience, of understanding what it meant to be judged and found wanting by others. Clara saw beyond Calder's gruff exterior to the man beneath, solitary not entirely by choice, but by circumstance. As another week passed, Clara found herself watching Calder when he wasn't looking, the careful way he skinned rabbits to preserve their pelts, how he chopped wood with efficient, powerful strokes, the gentleness in his hands when he tended a wounded fox kit he'd found in one of his traps. Sometimes she caught him watching her too, when she hummed while making bread, when she laughed at the antics of a squirrel on the windowsill, when she stood in the doorway at sunset, looking westward toward the mountains. They were building something fragile between them. Trust, certainly. Perhaps friendship. Clara dared not name what else might be growing in the quiet moments they shared. Their peaceful existence was shattered on the 10th day when a pounding at the door startled them both during breakfast. Calder motioned for Clara to stay seated as he opened the door, his hand resting on the rifle propped nearby. "Reed," a familiar voice snarled. "We need to talk." Clara's blood ran cold. Thomas Grady stood in the doorway, his face twisted with anger as his gaze moved from Calder to Clara. Behind him stood two men from town, their expressions equally hostile. "Seems we've found our missing widow," Thomas said, his eyes hard as flint. "Living in sin with the outlaw. Wait till Reverend Collins hears about this." Calder's hand tightened on his rifle, but his voice remained steady. "Miss Anderson was caught in the blizzard. I found her nearly frozen to death and offered shelter. Nothing improper has occurred." Thomas scoffed, his breath visible in the cold air. "A woman living alone with a man unmarried? That's improper enough." "What concern is it of yours, Grady?" Calder asked. "You made it clear she wasn't welcome in town." "We came to warn you," one of Thomas's companions said. "Stage is running again tomorrow. Both of you need to be on it." Clara stepped forward, finding her voice. "You have no right to dictate where either of us goes." Thomas's face darkened. "This town has standards, Mrs. Anderson. First you try to trick me into marriage, now you're living with a known criminal. Your kind isn't welcome here." "That's enough," Calder said, his tone dangerously quiet. "You've delivered your message. Now get off my property." Thomas held his ground for a moment, then spat on the doorstep. "Tomorrow's stage, otherwise we'll be back with more men." He turned to leave, his companions following, but called over his shoulder, "And Reed? If you touch her, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in." Calder shut the door firmly and turned to Clara. They stood in silence for a long moment, the threat hanging between them. "I'll go," Clara said finally. "You shouldn't face trouble because of me." Calder shook his head. "Where will you go?" "I don't know. Back east, perhaps. I still have distant relatives in Boston." "With what money?" Calder asked gently. Clara had no answer. What little savings she'd brought had been spent on her journey west. Without Thomas's support, she was penniless. Calder ran a hand through his dark hair. "They've been looking for a reason to run me off for years. This just gives them the excuse they wanted." He looked at her directly. "Stay, at least until we figure something out. I won't let them bully either of us." That night, snow began falling again, thick and heavy. By morning, drifts piled against the cabin walls, and the trail to town was impassable. The stage wouldn't run after all. Clara felt a guilty relief as she watched the snow continue to fall throughout the day. It bought them time, if nothing else. As the days passed and winter deepened, Clara and Calder settled into a comfortable rhythm. The forced isolation drew them closer. In the evenings, Calder taught Clara to play checkers on a board he'd carved himself. She taught him songs her mother had sung. They shared stories of their lives before Pine Ridge, Calder's childhood on a farm in Missouri, Clara's years working in her father's store. One night, as a blizzard howled outside, Calder revealed more of his past. "I was 17 when I joined up with the Dawson gang. Thought I was becoming a man." His eyes were distant with memory. "First job was a stagecoach. Nobody was supposed to get hurt." "But someone did," Clara guessed. Calder nodded. "Driver took a bullet in the shoulder. Could have been worse, but it was bad enough. I wanted out after that, but it's not the kind of work you just walk away from." "How did you eventually leave?" "Lawmen caught up to us in Wyoming. Most of the gang died in the shootout. I surrendered. Judge gave me 5 years instead of hanging because I testified against the others." Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You paid for your mistakes. You deserve a second chance." Calder looked at their joined hands, then slowly turned his palm up to hold hers. "So do you. Being a widow isn't a sin, Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it, combined with the warmth of his hand around hers, stirred something Clara had thought long dead. She met his gaze and saw the same realization in his eyes. Calder released her hand gently and stood. It's late. We should rest. The next morning brought clear skies and brittle cold. Calder announced he needed to check his trap lines and would be gone most of the day. Clara busied herself with chores, trying to ignore the unspoken tension between them. When Calder returned that afternoon, his cheeks ruddy from the cold, Clara had prepared a stew from the last of their rabbit meat. They ate in comfortable silence, occasionally catching each other's eye and smiling. After dinner, Calder brought out a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Found something while I was out today. Thought you might like it. Inside was a small wooden carving of a fox, its detailed features capturing the animal's alert expression perfectly. Clara ran her finger over the smooth wood. It's beautiful. Did you make this? Calder nodded, almost shy. Started it a few weeks ago. Finished it last night. Thank you, Clara said, touched by the gesture. I'll treasure it. Their eyes met and held. Neither spoke, but Clara felt something shift in the air between them, a current of possibility that hadn't been there before. Calder moved closer, slowly enough that she could have stepped away if she wished. Clara stayed where she was, her heart pounding. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, Clara closed her eyes and leaned into the kiss. His beard was soft against her skin, his hands careful as they framed her face. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth they created together. Calder drew back first, his eyes searching hers. I never expected to find someone like you, Clara. Nor I you, she whispered. The peace that had settled over them was shattered the next morning by the sound of voices outside. Clara peered through the window to see a group of men on horseback approaching through the snow. Thomas Grady was at the lead. They're back, she said, her voice tight with fear. And there are more of them this time. Calder grabbed his rifle from beside the door. Stay inside. Clara caught his arm. Number, we face them together. The pounding on the door was louder this time, more insistent. Calder opened it to find Thomas and 5 other men, all wearing expressions of righteous anger. Time's up, Reed, Thomas said. The town's had enough of you harboring that woman. The trail's been impassable, Calder replied evenly. As soon as it clears... It's clear enough now, one of the men interrupted. Stage is running today. You're both getting on it. Thomas stepped forward, his voice carrying to where Clara stood behind Calder. Unless Mrs. Anderson has reconsidered my original offer, I might be persuaded to overlook her past if she agrees to certain conditions. Clara moved to stand beside Calder. I would rather freeze to death in the wilderness than marry a man like you, Thomas Grady. Thomas's face contorted with rage. Then you can leave with him. You have 1 hour to pack your things. If you're not ready, we'll drag you both out anyway. As the men retreated to wait at a distance, Calder closed the door and turned to Clara. I'm sorry. I thought we had more time. Clara felt strangely calm. It's not your fault. Perhaps it's for the best. We can't hide here forever. Where will you go? Calder asked, the question weighted with meaning. Clara met his gaze steadily. Where will we go, you mean? I'm not leaving you, Calder. Not after everything. A smile broke across his face, transforming his features. I know a place. Old trapping cabin about 20 miles north. It's rough, but we could make it work until spring. He hesitated. It won't be easy. Clara took his hand, remembering how it had felt to kiss him, to be held by him. Nothing worth having ever is. The old trapping cabin proved more challenging than Calder had admitted. The roof leaked in one corner, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and wildlife had made homes in the walls during its abandonment. Still, Clara tackled each problem with determination, working alongside Calder to make their shelter habitable. Winter deepened around them. They fell into new rhythms, Calder teaching Clara to set simple snares while she experimented with ways to stretch their dwindling supplies. Their isolation might have been lonely, but they had each other. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked one evening as they sat before the fire. Leaving your cabin behind? Calder considered the question. The cabin? Number? It was just walls and a roof. This is no different. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. But I worry I've trapped you in a harder life than you deserve. Clara shook her head. I chose this. I chose you. She leaned against his shoulder, savoring his warmth. For the first time since Jacob died, I feel like I'm living again, not just surviving. They kissed in the firelight, no longer tentative but sure of what they wanted. When Calder whispered against her hair that he loved her, Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. She had not expected to find love again, certainly not here in the wilderness with a man the world had judged and cast aside. 2 weeks after their flight from Pine Ridge, Calder left at dawn to check his trap lines. The weather had held clear for days, making it easier to cover the increasing distance he needed to travel for game. Clara spent the morning mending his spare shirt, humming to herself in the quiet cabin. The sound of approaching horses pulled her attention from her work. Through the window she spotted 3 riders making their way through the snow toward the cabin. Her heart sank as she recognized Thomas Grady at the lead. Clara grabbed the rifle Calder had taught her to use and positioned herself near the door. When the pounding came, she called out, "What do you want, Thomas?" "Just to talk, Mrs. Anderson," he replied, his voice carrying the false pleasantness she had once mistaken for gentility. "Alone, if possible." "Calder isn't here," she admitted, regretting the words instantly. "All the better. Open up. It's freezing out here." Against her better judgment, Clara unbarred the door, keeping the rifle visible. Thomas entered alone, stamping snow from his boots while his companions remained mounted outside. "Quite the little homestead you've made," Thomas remarked, surveying the modest cabin. "Though I'm surprised a woman of your background would settle for such primitive accommodations." Clara kept her distance. "Why are you here?" "To offer you one last chance at redemption." Thomas removed his gloves deliberately. "The town's been talking. A respectable widow living with a known criminal, unmarried. It reflects poorly on Pine Ridge." "We're hardly in Pine Ridge anymore." "Close enough for people to care." Thomas stepped closer. "Return with me now. Say he forced you to come here. I'll speak to Reverend Collins on your behalf. We can still make things right." Clara tightened her grip on the rifle. "There's nothing to make right. I'm exactly where I want to be." Thomas's expression hardened. "With an outlaw? A man with blood on his hands? Do you even know what he's done?" "I know everything about him," Clara replied. "More than I ever knew about you in all our letters." "He's a wanted man, Clara." Thomas pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This arrived on yesterday's stage. Seems your lover has unfinished business in Wyoming. $500 reward." Clara took the paper with trembling hands. It was indeed a wanted poster bearing Calder's likeness and name, claiming he was sought for questioning in relation to a stagecoach robbery 5 years earlier. "This makes no sense," she whispered. "He served his time." "Apparently not for all his crimes," Thomas said with satisfaction. "The bounty hunter who brought this is searching for him now. Man named Holloway. Very determined fellow." Cold fear washed over Clara. "You led a bounty hunter to him." "The law is the law, Mrs. Anderson, even out here." Thomas held out his hand. "Come with me before this turns ugly. It's your last chance." Clara raised the rifle. "Get out." For once, Thomas seemed to recognize the seriousness of her intent. He backed toward the door. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was ever agreeing to marry you." Clara kept the rifle steady. "Now go, before Calder returns." Thomas paused at the door. "He won't be returning. Holloway found his tracks an hour ago. By now, your outlaw is either dead or in chains." After Thomas and his men departed, Clara paced the cabin in growing fear. The afternoon stretched into evening with no sign of Calder. She kept the fire built high, hoping its light would guide him home through the darkness. When she finally heard sounds outside, Clara rushed to the door. Instead of Calder's familiar tread, she heard a pained groan and the thud of a body falling against the cabin wall. She flung open the door to find Calder slumped in the snow, blood darkening the left side of his coat. "Calder!" she gasped, helping him inside. "What happened?" "Bounty hunter," he managed, grimacing as she eased him onto their bed. "Shot me when I wouldn't surrender. I lost him in the trees, but he'll be looking." Clara cut away his coat and shirt to reveal an ugly wound in his shoulder. The bullet had passed through, which was fortunate, but he'd lost blood, and the wound needed cleaning. "Thomas Grady brought him here," she explained as she worked, heating water and preparing bandages. "He came earlier with a wanted poster." Calder winced as she began cleaning the wound. "Wyoming. I wondered if that would ever catch up to me." "You said you served your time." "For the robberies they knew about. There was one more, just before I was caught. A man was killed. I wasn't there, had already left the gang, but my name was still connected." His eyes found hers, pleading for understanding. "I swear to you, Clara, I never killed anyone." Clara pressed a kiss to his forehead. "I believe you. But the bounty hunter won't care, and neither will Thomas." She finished bandaging his shoulder and helped him drink some water. "We have to get you somewhere safe until you heal." "No time," Calder said weakly. "Holloway will find this place by morning. You need to go, Clara. Back to town. Say I kidnapped you. Save yourself." Clara shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you. We'll think of something." That night, Clara barricaded the cabin doors and kept watch while Calder fell into a fitful sleep. His fever rose, making him restless and delirious. By dawn, she knew they couldn't stay. Holloway would find them, and in Calder's condition, he had no chance of escaping again. Clara made her decision. After checking that Calder was sleeping, she took his hunting knife and cut a significant length from her hair. She dressed in Calder's spare clothes, binding her chest and tucking her remaining hair under his hat. In the dim light, at a distance, she might pass for him. She left a note beside him, explaining her plan. She would lead the bounty hunter away, giving Calder time to recover enough to travel. They would meet at the waterfall they had discovered 3 miles east in 3 days' time. "I love you," she whispered, kissing his fevered brow before slipping out into the dawn. Clara deliberately left tracks leading away from the cabin, moving through the woods as Calder had taught her. She found a high ridge with good visibility and waited, Calder's rifle across her knees. When she spotted a rider following her trail, she fired a shot into the air and moved again, drawing the hunter further from the cabin. The ruse worked for most of the day. By afternoon, however, Clara's strength was flagging. The bounty hunter was skilled, gradually closing the distance between them. As she crossed a frozen stream, her foot broke through the ice, soaking her boot. The air temperature was dropping rapidly. She needed shelter before nightfall. Clara was climbing a steep hillside when she heard the distinctive click of a pistol being cocked behind her. "That's far enough, Reed," a rough voice commanded. "Turn around. Slow." Clara turned slowly, keeping her hands visible as she faced the bounty hunter. He was a weathered man with cold eyes and a scar running along his jaw. His pistol remained trained on her chest. "You're not Reed," he said, confusion crossing his features as he took in her appearance. "Where is he?" "Gone," Clara replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "Left yesterday heading north." The bounty hunter, Holloway, dismounted from his horse, keeping his pistol aimed at her. "And you are?" "His wife," Clara lied. "He abandoned me when he heard you were coming." Holloway studied her suspiciously. "Reed doesn't have a wife." "Not legally, no." Clara allowed some of her genuine anger at Thomas to color her words. Men make promises they don't intend to keep. For a moment, indecision flickered across Holloway's face. Then he gestured with his pistol. "Take off the hat." Clara complied, letting her shortened hair fall free. Holloway lowered his weapon slightly. "You're the widow, the one from town." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Grady mentioned you." "Thomas Grady is a self-righteous fool," Clara said bitterly. "He rejected me, then couldn't bear to see me find happiness elsewhere." Holloway holstered his pistol. I'm not paid to sort out romantic entanglements, ma'am. I'm after Reed for murder. He didn't kill anyone, Clara insisted. He wasn't even present for that last robbery. That's for a judge to decide. Holloway glanced at the darkening sky. It'll be night soon. You shouldn't be out here alone. I'll escort you back to town. Clara shook her head. I'm not going back there. Before Holloway could respond, a shout echoed across the ridge. Thomas Grady and two other men from Pine Ridge appeared on horseback, rifles in hand. Holloway, Thomas called. Did you find them? The bounty hunter turned toward the approaching riders. Just the woman. Says Reed went north. Thomas dismounted, eyeing Clara with contempt. She's lying. She'd say anything to protect him. While the men were distracted, Clara edged toward a narrow path that led down the other side of the ridge. If she could reach the dense trees below, she might lose them in the gathering darkness. Mrs. Anderson, Thomas said sharply, noticing her movement. Don't make this worse for yourself. One of the men with Thomas raised his rifle. Maybe we should burn the cabin, smoke him out if he's hiding there. Panic surged through Clara. Calder's hurt. He can't run. She realized her mistake immediately. Thomas's eyes lit with triumph. So he is at the cabin, he said. Let's go. We can have this settled by nightfall. Wait, Clara pleaded, looking to Holloway. He deserves a fair trial, not a lynching. The bounty hunter seemed to consider her words, but Thomas was already mounting his horse. This has gone beyond legal niceties. That man stole what was mine. I was never yours, Clara said fiercely. I made my choice freely. Thomas ignored her, spurring his horse back toward the cabin. His companions followed. Holloway hesitated, then gestured for Clara to mount his horse behind him. I'll make sure they don't kill him before he stands trial, he promised. They reached the cabin as the last light faded from the sky. Thomas and his men had already surrounded it, their rifles aimed at the door. A faint light flickered inside. Reed! Thomas shouted. Come out with your hands up! No response came from within. Clara slid from Holloway's horse, her heart pounding with fear. Had Calder been too weak to escape? He's wounded, she said to Holloway. Let me go in first. The bounty hunter nodded reluctantly. No tricks. Clara approached the cabin slowly, hands raised. Calder, it's Clara. I'm coming in. She pushed open the door to find the cabin empty. The fire was burning low, and Calder's bed was vacant. Relief washed over her until Thomas shoved past her into the cabin. Where is he? He demanded, grabbing her arm roughly. I don't know, Clara answered truthfully. Search the area, Thomas ordered his men. He can't have gone far. As they moved to obey, Clara noticed smoke in the air. Not from the cabin's hearth. This was sharper, more acrid. Fire! One of Thomas's men shouted from outside. The forest is on fire! They rushed outside to see flames spreading rapidly through the dry underbrush near the cabin. The winter had been unusually dry, and the dead vegetation caught quickly. Wind drove the fire toward them. We need to get out of here, Holloway said, already mounting his horse. Now! Thomas grabbed Clara's arm again. This is Reed's doing. Where is he? A child's scream cut through the chaos. All heads turned toward the sound, which came from a small ravine beyond the cabin. There, illuminated by the growing blaze, stood a small figure, a boy no more than 6 years old, trapped between two advancing walls of flame. Jimmy Porter! One of Thomas's men exclaimed. What's he doing out here? Must have followed us from town, the other man said, his face pale with fear. The boy screamed again as the flames drew closer. Thomas and his men stood frozen, the danger evident, but none willing to risk the inferno. Clara didn't hesitate. She broke free from Thomas and ran toward the ravine, holding her coat over her head for minimal protection. The heat was intense, burning her lungs as she called out to the terrified child. Jimmy, stay where you are! I'm coming! She had almost reached him when a section of burning pine crashed down, blocking her path. Clara cried out in frustration, searching desperately for another route. Then, Emerging through the smoke like a specter came Calder. He moved with purpose despite his injury, reaching the boy and scooping him into his arms. He spotted Clara and gestured toward a narrow gap in the flames. "This way!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. Together they navigated through the burning forest, Calder leading with the child while Clara followed close behind. The smoke thickened, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Clara kept her eyes on Calder's back, trusting him completely. They emerged from the woods near the stream Clara had crossed earlier. Calder waded in immediately, holding Jimmy above the water as he moved to the center where they would be safe from the spreading flames. Clara joined them, the cold water a blessed relief against her scorched skin. From the stream, they watched as the fire reached the cabin. It caught quickly, the old timber erupting in flames that stretched toward the night sky. On the far bank stood Thomas, Holloway, and the men from town, their faces illuminated by the blaze. For long minutes, no one spoke. Then Holloway splashed across the stream to where Calder stood, still holding the trembling child. "That was a brave thing you did, Reed," the bounty hunter said grudgingly. Calder nodded, his face grim. "The boy was innocent. I couldn't let him die." "You could have run," Holloway observed. "Why didn't you?" Calder's eyes found Clara's. "Some things are worth more than freedom." Holloway seemed to consider this. He looked at the child in Calder's arms, then at Clara, and finally back to Calder. "The warrant says, 'wanted for questioning.' It doesn't specify charges." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Holloway replied slowly, "that I came looking for a dangerous criminal. What I found was a man willing to risk his life for a child." He reached into his coat and pulled out the wanted poster, examining it in the firelight. "Looks like I've got the wrong man. Reed died in that fire, as far as I'm concerned." He tore the poster in half and let the pieces fall into the stream. Thomas splashed across to them, his face twisted with fury. "You can't do that. He's a wanted man." "Not anymore," Holloway said firmly. "And unless you want to explain to Mrs. Porter how her son ended up in a forest fire miles from town, I suggest you keep quiet about it." Thomas looked from Holloway to the boy, who was now clinging to Calder's neck. His rage deflated visibly. "What about her?" he asked, gesturing to Clara. "What about her?" Holloway countered. "She's a free woman." 1 month later, Clara stood on the porch of a newly constructed cabin, watching as Calder split wood in the yard. After the fire, they had traveled to Helena, where Calder officially cleared his name with the authorities in Wyoming. With Holloway's testimony about the rescue and character witnesses from Helena who knew Calder from his trading visits, the matter was resolved without jail time. They had married in a small ceremony in Helena before returning to build their new home, not far from Pine Ridge, but in a different valley. To their surprise, several families from town had come to help with the construction, bringing supplies and food. Jimmy Porter's rescue had transformed Calder from outlaw to hero in many eyes. Clara placed a hand on her stomach, where the first signs of new life were just beginning to show. She hadn't told Calder yet, waiting for the right moment. They had spoken of children, both wanting a family, but neither expecting the blessing to come so soon. As if sensing her gaze, Calder looked up from his work and smiled. He set down his axe and walked to the porch, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Reed?" he murmured against her hair. Clara leaned back against his chest, savoring the strength and warmth of him. "About beginnings and second chances." "We've had more than our share of those," he agreed. "And we're about to have another," Clara said softly, guiding his hand to rest against her stomach. Calder went still, then turned her gently to face him. "Are you certain?" Clara nodded, her eyes filling with happy tears. "In the autumn, our first harvest." Calder's face transformed with joy as he lifted her in his arms, spinning her around on the porch. His laughter, once so rare, now came easily and often. When he set her down, he kissed her with tender reverence. I never thought I'd have this, he confessed. A home, a family, you. Clara touched his cheek, remembering the lost and wounded souls they had both been just months ago. Neither did I, but here we are. In the distance, the town of Pine Ridge was visible, its church steeple catching the afternoon light. Clara no longer felt fear or shame when she thought of the place. They made monthly trips there to trade, and while some still regarded them with suspicion, others had come to accept the unusual couple who had found love against all odds. Thomas Grady had left for California, unable to face the humiliation of being associated with the incident. Mrs. Porter had become an unexpected ally, bringing other women to visit Clara and learn her methods for preserving food and tending a garden in the harsh Montana climate. As winter gave way to spring, Clara found herself teaching the children of nearby homesteads their letters and numbers 3 afternoons a week. The small school they had established in their front room was growing, much like everything else in their lives. Standing in her husband's embrace, watching the sun sink toward the mountains they now called home, Clara felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had journeyed west, seeking a new beginning, never imagining the form it would take or the man with whom she would share it. "I love you, Clara Reed," Calder whispered, his hand gentle on her stomach where their child grew. Clara turned in his arms to face the sunset, her heart full. "And I love you, always."